Welcome to the I can't even get through the first sentence. Take two. Welcome to the Heritage Universalist Unitarian Church. There's more. A special welcome goes to our visitors. Please sign our guest book and feel free to help yourself to pamphlets that you may find outside in the lobby. If you have any questions or want to learn more about our church, please find our greeter from the Board of Trustees, which is Gary Wilson today, in the back. After the service, we invite you to join us for refreshments and conversation in the Great Hall, which is to the right of the lobby outside the sanctuary doors. You will find a friendly, approachable community here. I've been a member for about 15 months. What attracts me to Universalist Unitarian faith in general, and heritage in particular, is that our doubts are just as important as our beliefs. Unlike most religions, UUs never arrive at the answer. We never presume to think that we already have, or even one day ever will arrive at the answer. We are always growing, ever changing, always seeking. On the back of the order of service, you will find a plethora of activities, clubs, and events. Today at 1 p.m., back here in the sanctuary, we will be watching a live stream of the Sunday morning worship service from our Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly. Grab some lunch, come back to Heritage, and watch the service here with your friends. And if you are planning to stay for the GA worship service at 1, Rebecca Pace has ordered pizza and salad. Thank you, Rebecca. Now, let us quiet our minds and our phones to ready ourselves for worship.
We gather this midsummer morning and to grow imperceptibly shorter. We gather, newcomers and longtime members alike, the hopeful and the hurting, the aged and the not yet aged. We gather seeking community, seeking justice, seeking a home for our spiritual yearning and searching, seeking, in a word, love. In another word, acceptance. In another word, purpose. May we find here this morning in this sanctuary, in these people, in ourselves, that which we seek. Come, let us worship together. Let your spirits rise, and let your bodies rise as they are able, and join me in singing our opening hymn, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. If you're here in the sanctuary, the words will appear on the wall behind me, and if you're with us today on Zoom, the words will be on your screen. When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.
When our heart is in a holy place.
we affirm that love is the spirit of this church, the quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God. Our Director of Lifespan Faith Development, Lacey Adams, is taking a well-deserved vacation today, but I have a video message for you that is indeed intended to be a message for anyone of all ages. This is a wonderful little book titled Whatever Comes Tomorrow by Rebecca Garden-Levington. It is read by Stella Anderson, the Director of Spiritual Growth and Development at the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Whatever Comes Tomorrow. Words by Rebecca Garden-Levington. Art by Mariona Cabasa. Tomorrow may bring endless sun or swirly, snowy skies. Tomorrow may bring new hellos or difficult goodbyes. Tomorrow may bring loneliness or laughter with a friend. Tomorrow may bring words that wound or ones that heal and mend. Tomorrow may bring changes that are scary, strange, or new. Tomorrow may bring chances to embrace your truest you. Tomorrow may bring obstacles that seem too hard to face. Tomorrow may bring feelings that will need some extra space. Tomorrow may bring questions or answers that may lead you to more questions than before. Tomorrow may bring anything. You have no way to know. And sometimes that uncertainty gives worries room to grow. They sprout and bloom, consume your mind. You want to run and hide. But you've confronted fear before and reached the other side. You can't control what happens next. The what, the where, the how. The only thing in your control is you, right here, right now. You take a breath, you close your eyes, you whisper, I am strong. You tell those worries in your head, I know I can, you're wrong. And when tomorrow disappears, becoming yesterday, you'll know for sure you can endure whatever comes your way. Tomorrow may bring laughter, love, confusion, fear, or fun, an angry, rainy hurricane, or peaceful seaside sun. Whatever comes tomorrow, however steep the hill, you'll find your path, you'll journey on, you'll make it through. You will. The end.
You take a breath, you close your eyes, you know that you are strong. Whatever comes tomorrow, I know that we will hold one another in love. For those of us who are involved in Unitarian Universalism at a denominational level, and I realize that's not very many of us, all things considered, but I see our delegates here in the sanctuary today. But for those of us who are engaged with other UUs at a local or regional or national level beyond the boundaries of Heritage Church, This week has perhaps been an intense and sometimes even painful reminder of the challenges inherent in living and loving in diverse community. For the past 4 days, our National General Assembly has been engaged in very important and decision-making. It has at times been inspiring and at other times deeply discouraging. It has been, for me, something of an emotional and a spiritual roller coaster. I know some of you have put your heart and soul on the line for what you believe in as we Unitarian Universalists make decisions that will affect our shared future. So I honor you. I salute you. I thank you. But I also want to speak this morning to those of you who are not denominationally involved, because I know that the vast majority of us gathered here today, whether in the sanctuary or on Zoom, are not as well versed in the pros and cons, to use a General Assembly phrase, of the issues that face this General Assembly this year. Yet I suspect many of you have sensed that there is something going on in Unitarian Universalism right now, and that whatever it is has been causing a lot of people you know, and a lot of people you don't know, discomfort, and in some cases even harm, creating more than a little bit of anxiety in the system, so to speak, and we are all, like it or not, part of that system. So at this time in our service, before we get a little deeper into the background, the context, the details of what's taking place in the religious movement known as Unitarian Universalism, I think it does behoove us all to close our eyes, take a breath, and know that we are strong. The breath is what centers us. The breath can call us back to the here and the now. It can ground us, help us feel and experience our rootedness in this present moment. So let us breathe together for a few seconds, drawing into our bodies that sacred spirit, that love which surrounds us each and every breath of our lives. Thank you. Centered, rooted, and grounded here and now, let us begin with a little background and context for the moment in which we find ourselves. '61, by the consolidation of the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America. This church, Heritage Church, was part of the latter, a Universalist church, and hence our rather unusual and somewhat defiant insistence on calling ourselves Heritage Universalist Unitarian Church, where the Universalist comes first. Because in fact, the Universalist has been coming first for us for nearly 200 years, dating back to our founding as the first Universalist Society of Cincinnati in 1827. Like any institution that is almost 2 centuries old, this congregation has been witness to innumerable changes. I think I mentioned a few weeks ago that when our church was formed, the telegraph had not yet been invented. Today, this service can literally be viewed and listened to live in real time anywhere on the planet. What might our founders have thought of that? Talk about change. We have at this very altar, in various generations, engaged in rituals that range from the taking of communion, Christian body and blood of Christ communion, to our current flower and water communions and our candles of community ritual. Again, can you say change? This congregation has seen it and lived through it. We have seen civil war, 2 world wars, and 1, or is it now 2, Cold Wars. We have seen slavery and the abolition of slavery. We have seen Reconstruction and race riots, depending on what source you choose, anywhere from 8 to a dozen or more so-called race riots over the course of our church's history in this turbulent border town. We have absorbed 2 other congregations, a church called Second Universalist in the 19th century and a congregation called City Temple in the 20th century. Yet we've also come dangerously close to folding and fading away ourselves on more than one occasion. We have celebrated the rapid expansion of Universalism, which was at one time the 4th largest religious denomination in the country, and we have mourned its decline. We have seen its ultimate merger with the Unitarians, which our congregation, at that time called Salem Acres Community Church Universalist, voted against. Yet we did ultimately become a member congregation of the UUA. And that particular language means something. We are a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association. When that body was created in 1961, bylaws were written, which of course were hotly debated and controversial. Statements of faith were adopted, which was a key difference. Unlike bylaws, they were essentially non-binding. As Bruce stated at the start of our service this morning, one of the things that is unique about Unitarian Universalism is that we are emphatically and intentionally not a creedal or doctrinal religion. In other words, Unitarian Universalists, as long as there have been UUs, which remember is only since 1961, have never told one another what they had to believe. We've never told members or newcomers that you have to believe X or Y in order to be part of this religious community. Come in loving good faith and you are welcome here. Treat others with love and respect and you are welcome here. Your religious and spiritual beliefs, those are your religious and spiritual beliefs. Instead of a more traditional way of organizing church around a set of doctrines or creeds or agreed upon beliefs about, say, God or Jesus, the afterlife or the meaning of life, we organize ourselves around a set of principles. And for 24 years after the UUA was formed, from 1961 to 1985, there were some statements of principle or belief, or however you want to put it, that reflected the cultural context and the zeitgeist of those days, the spirit of the time, and thus contained and consisted of the language current at the time, which is to say, patriarchal language. Thus it was that a group of leading UU women, including our own minister, Reverend Eleanor Artman, pushed for change and modernization, such that in 1985 the language was indeed revised and updated, again with a lot of debate and controversy, resulting in what we now call the 7 Principles. Which brings me back to a phrase that I lifted up a moment ago, what it means to be, as Heritage Church is, a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Since the mid-1980s, that has meant, as stated in Article 2 of the bylaws of the UUA, that we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. My friend, Reverend Barbara Wells Tenhove, who delivered the sermon at my ordination to the UU ministry, is quoted on the website of the UU or doctrine, but rather a guide for those of us who choose to join and participate in Unitarian Universalist religious communities. But the zeitgeist, the spirit of these times, of any times, is ever changing. And a new guide is being written, a new map is being drawn, a new diagram of our path by a new generation of Unitarian Universalists. Yesterday, the delegates to the online virtual General Assembly of the UUA voted, again, after much debate and controversy, and sadly, after some very hurtful and mean-spirited dialogue and comments, mostly but not exclusively limited to the Zoom chat and various breakout rooms. Yesterday, the delegates cast their final votes on a set of revisions to Article 2 that included replacing the 7 principles with a set of one-word values that, along with love, include things like generosity and transformation. And so it was that today I had planned to preach about and center this service around the outcome of that vote, whatever it may have been. But you know what they say about the best laid plans. It seems that the rules of procedure of the General Assembly are such that the results of voting are not announced until the start of the next scheduled general session, which will not begin until 3 o'clock this afternoon. So while there are probably a few people somewhere who know the results of that vote, we're not among them. As we gather here 12 full hours later after the voting closed, still awaiting the results. Go figure. I think back to 1961, when the Unitarian Universalist Association was created, and I'm pretty confident that those votes, including the nay votes from our congregation, were hand counted. But you know what? When they were at last counted and announced, however that happened, a new religious movement came into existence. And what happened that those people in attendance decided they wanted to sing. So they sang a hymn that had been specially created for the occasion, the very first worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Today we call that hymn as Tranquil Streams, and it is number 145 in your hymnal, which importantly itself is called Singing the Living Tradition. Please join me now in singing the hymn that blessed the merger of the Unitarians and the Universalists as Tranquil Streams. I invite you to rise in body or spirit. So we are that future they were singing about. And you'll notice the frequent use of the word free and the concept of freedom in that hymn. I've spoken a little bit already today about our own congregational history, offering you some background and context and hopefully some perspective on the changes that have been taking place in the wider UU world this weekend. I continue that thread now by reminding us of something called congregational polity, a concept that has been part and parcel of Unitarian Universalism for generations. Congregational polity is an idea that dates back here in North America even before the Declaration of Independence, an idea that the locally gathered religious community, in this case the individual church or congregation, is the ultimate authority and arbiter of its own decisions and destiny. This differs radically from what is known as episcopal polity, the hierarchical style of church governance that is practiced by many religious groups in America and worldwide, in which an external authority, think bishops and popes, synods and councils, often has the power to enforce rules, declare doctrine, and even make mundane decisions about how local churches will operate. By contrast, in our governance model, congregational polity, each church, Cincinnati alone, consider that each church, and specifically the members of each church, make their own decisions about everything from how much money is spent on coffee to who the minister is. Everything from how worship is conducted to how the grass is mowed. Yet, as has already been mentioned, we at Heritage and all the other UU churches in Cincinnati and elsewhere are themselves members of a larger body, member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association. We have freely chosen to enter into this association, and the UUA therefore is allowed to make some decisions as well. So obviously there's an inherent tension. We are independent, and Heritage is decidedly and proudly independent, but we're also interdependent. We're part of an interdependent web, not only in the natural world, but in the UU world as well. Holding these two sometimes conflicting realities at once can be, shall we say, challenging. But we are not the first generation for whom this has been difficult. Our UU history, and it is always helpful to consider our UU history, is filled with the push and pull of change and challenge. James Luther Adams, who at one point in the 20th century was considered the preeminent theologian of Unitarianism, reflected often on this dilemma. I've asked Bill Lyon to read a passage from Adams that is in our hymnal, which both speaks to the meaning of congregational polity and frames that meaning within a larger context of spirituality.
For those of you who have one of these books and you want to read it again, it's 591 in the hymnal. I call that church free. I call that church free which enters into covenant with the ultimate source of existence, that sustaining and transforming power not made with human hands. It binds together families and generations, protecting against idolatry of any human claim to absolute truth or authority. This covenant is the charter and responsibility and joy of worship in the face of death as well as life. I call that church free, which brings individuals into a caring, trusting fellowship that protects and nourishes their integrity and spiritual freedom, that yearns to belong to the church universal. It is open to insight and conscience from every source. It bursts through rigid tradition, giving rise to new and living language, to new and broader fellowship. It is a pilgrim church, a servant church, prophethood and priesthood of all believers, the one for the liberty of prophesying, the other for the ministry of healing. It aims to find unity and diversity under the promptings of the Spirit that bloweth where it listeth and maketh all things new. The words of James Luther Adams. And one of the things he speaks to is the ministry of healing. And that's something I think we do at this church every week when we take an offering, accept an offering, only to give away our plate to organizations in need of that. And there is such an organization that we give to a lot of times because we're partners with the Interparish Ministry. When I say partners, I mean we donate funds, but we also have a lot of our members who volunteer, and I see a couple of them out in the crowd today. Did you know that over 1 million pounds of food are given away each year? 1 million pounds of food each year? 60,000 visits happen at that, either at the location or around the community. And it's had a number of leaders over the years who I've known and really appreciated. But I am so thrilled to know that starting July 1st, less than a week from now, there will be a new leader of the interparish ministry who happens to be a member of this church. Melissa Meyer will become the new CEO. So we'd like to take the offering, and I think the bowls are down here. Really?
On that shelf.
Amazing what you forget in a couple of years. We will receive the offering, and as we do so, consider that we're doing this in honor of 60 years of history and the newness of a CEO who comes close to home. There we go. Generosity that will always be part of this church.
I took the title of my reflection this morning from one of the most famous and influential sermons in Unitarian history, The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity, delivered by Theodore Parker at the ordination of a minister named Charles Chauncey Shackford in Boston on May 19, 1841. This is a picture of Theodore Parker. He is the one who shaped history. I couldn't even find a picture of Shackford on the internet, but we are eternally grateful to him for inviting Parker to preach at his ordination, because Parker's sermon has been considered, at least in the ministerial training that I received, to be one of the three most important sermons in our denominational history. There's even a book that we were required to read when I was in seminary called The Three Prophets of Religious Liberalism, Channing, Emerson, and Parker. I understand that such reading is no longer required of aspiring UU ministers, but nonetheless, Parker's influence on Unitarianism, Unitarian Universalism, and quite honestly on American history and thought remains profound. As just one example of that influence, perhaps you have heard and maybe even repeated the famous quote by Martin Luther King Jr., "The arc of the universe bends toward justice." But perhaps you're not aware that King was using a trope from none other than Theodore Parker, the radical 19th century abolitionist who, while serving as a Unitarian minister in a small church outside Boston, also A, kept his grandfather's rifle, which had been used to fire some of the first shots of the Revolutionary War, right next to him on his sermon writing desk in order to protect any future. B, willingly, intentionally, and publicly flaunted the Fugitive Slave Act, and C, raised money to help fund John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Though let us not forget, as both Parker and King preached, that it is ultimately up to us to do the bending. Which brings me back to Parker's revolutionary sermon, which I am using as the frame for my thoughts today on the transient and the permanent in Unitarian Universalism. As I said earlier, I had fully expected this morning to be reflecting on the outcome of yesterday's final vote at the UUA General Assembly regarding changing Article 2 of our bylaws, the section that quite literally defines what Unitarian Universalism is. Instead, this morning I feel the way I imagine some Catholics must feel as they await that puff of smoke which indicates a new pope has been elected. The future, at least the immediate short-term future of our religion, hangs into balance, and you wait till 3 o'clock. But I can also take a longer view beyond the middle of the afternoon this afternoon, which is indeed the point of my remarks today anyway. I can remind us that there have been 266 popes throughout history. Talk about ebbs and flows. Many of them, even in our own lifetimes, have differed wildly in opinion and in edict from their predecessor. In fact, the current pope has made statements that I suspect all, if not nearly every single previous pope would have considered heretical, because times do change. Which is a good reminder to those of us who identify as Unitarian Universalists that whatever changes will ultimately come here in the year 2024 to our faith, those changes will be but the latest in what we call our living tradition. Living precisely because it is ever-changing, ever-evolving, generation after generation, changing with the times, often, to be honest, running more ahead of the times than with the times, leading the way for change and progress. Because we change and we survive. Sometimes we even thrive. That's what happened in our own little corner of the religious landscape of America in 1841 when Theodore Parker gave his now famous ordination sermon. In those remarks, he staked out new theological ground, seeking to move the religion that he was part of, that the previous generation to him had dubbed Unitarianism, Christianity, to one that held to, embraced, celebrated the so-called universal truths in the teachings of Jesus, while letting go of many of the teachings about Jesus. Beliefs that his generation felt had over the centuries calcified and clouded Jesus' vision of beloved community. In short, Parker was urging his contemporaries to sort the wheat from the chaff, what he called the transient in Christianity, that which comes and goes, that which is changing, from the permanent, that which is universal, eternal, underlying truth. Parker's sermon effectively declared and made some aspects of the Unitarianism of his day transient, instantly outmoded in the course of one sermon. He moved the historical needle. Since then, that needle has been moved many more times, of course. Today, you would be hard-pressed to get Unitarian Universalists worked up to argue about the divinity of Jesus, or about the efficacy of communion, or how those who commit evil in this world may or may not be punished in an afterlife. But those were once hot-button issues for us. And so, too, I imagine that our own hot-button issues, the controversies of this year or this weekend, will one day, and probably in the not-too-distant future, prove to be transient. What has stood the test of time, however, what has been much more permanent, is the very idea and ideal that this church, Heritage Church, has emphasized now for generations: love. Love is not only the spirit of this church, it is what is timeless and ongoing about this church. We, and again, let me remind you that we have been gathered now in Cincinnati for nearly 200 years, we begin with love, we lead with love, we turn back to love when we inevitably go astray and miss the mark, when we, without fail, end up hurting someone or falling short of our best selves. When we are out of step, out of covenant, we turn to love. We return to love. Consider all that has been transient through the generations in just this one church, which we now call Heritage. Our name. Things like the importance and meaning of rituals like communion, things like our engagement or lack thereof in the surrounding community or with the issues of the day, things like the location and condition of the building in which we meet, our ministers and lay leaders. Yes, we are all transient. Things like whether or not to have a mortgage. I kid you not. Just ask anyone who's chuckling, any of our oldest members, about the great chair controversy of the 1990s, or was it 1980s? Does it matter? The point is that and other controversies were transient. We no longer argue about them. We no longer care about them. We laugh about them. Although at the time, the chairs were so important, for example, that there were folks who left the church over it. There are countless other controversies that I mentioned and that I haven't mentioned, where folks cared enough about them to leave when the outcome was not what they had hoped. I hold these thoughts in my mind and in my heart today as we await the outcome of the UUA's Article 2 vote. There have been those in our congregation who have been very deeply involved in the debate, very active in the planning and the politicking that led up to yesterday's vote on both sides. But they and we have always sought, just as the proposed new Article 2 does, to center love in our own church community, even while we hold very different beliefs and opinions about the changes that are happening in Unitarian Universalism. May we continue to hold that which is permanent, love, even as we disagree about that which is transient. Which probably brings us to a good time for another breathing break. So just as we did earlier, let's all take a moment to draw in a deep breath, to let go of thinking, even just for a moment or two, about the past or the future, and to simply be here, now, in the present, with one another, with our beloveds, in community, sharing the life-sustaining breath that the world offers us each and every second. Let's be and breathe together. May we honor the Spirit of life in each and in all. Amen. I conclude my remarks, as I began, with acknowledging just how difficult the past few days have been for many Unitarian Universalists, including me. I had actually expected that yesterday, with its highly charged subject matter, the changes to Article 2, the proposed revisions of our bylaws that include the removal of the 7 principles from them, would have been the most challenging day of this year's General Assembly, but it was not. Instead, that was Friday, when a seemingly non-controversial, at least for we Unitarian Universalists, resolution titled "Embracing Transgender, Non-Binary, and Intersex People is a Fundamental Expression of Unitarian Universalist Values" led to some very unfortunate moments, some unthinking and insensitive comments, some deep and profound hurt for our LGBTQ plus delegates and online viewers, as expressed in the chat and on camera. Transphobia and microaggressions were called out. Moderators and chaplain teams were called in. Names were called, particularly in the Zoom chat, which is, for my money, one of the worst possible platforms for discussing anything important that ever was invented. But friends, we live in a time when the zeitgeist of our day is such that virtual shaming and shunning, vitriolic attacks via a few keyboard strokes, have too often taken the place of real human, compassionate conversation, of listening and learning, which of course have seemingly become passé. Empathy and emotional intelligence are in short supply. We'd like to think that isn't so, at least in Unitarian Universalist spaces, but it is. There were times this week, and not just the one I'm talking about specifically, when I hung my head in dismay and shame at what my fellow UUs were saying to and about one another. It's clear to me that a lot of us are living with, suffering from, and carrying tremendous amounts of trauma. We are wounded, we are fragile. And exactly when we most ought to be, we are not being nice to one another. So that's what was going on late Friday afternoon, with virtual cries of pain from our queer and gender nonconforming members, many of whom were typing into the chat that they could no longer feel safe in Unitarian Universalism and that they were going to leave, not because of a chair, but because of the harm that had been caused to who they are. But at that moment came something that I believe will go down in UU history, that will become part of our canon of tradition, listened to and replayed by future generations, much as Theodore Parker's sermon was studied by my generation. It certainly went instantly viral in Unitarian Universalist circles, and by yesterday morning it was both a meme and a video. I know from many people with whom I've spoken to, both here in Cincinnati and texted with all over the country, that at the time it elicited tears. It certainly brought me to tears, even thinking about it. Knowing that I'm going to watch it again here in a second makes me teary. And I also believe that it brought many of our beloveds back into the circle of covenant and community. It was one of the most powerful and pastoral moments that I've ever witnessed in my 3+ decades of ministry. And it did all that in 90 seconds, while centering and unapologetically emphasizing the permanent, the timeless, the main eternal aspect of our faith tradition: love for all, including and most especially our marginalized and hurting siblings. This is the Reverend Jakaran Olaoya.
To my trans, non-binary, intersex, or gender diverse beloveds, lean in, lean in. I love you. I love you. I love you. Please do not leave this space without feeling my love and the love of others who see you as divine. I love you. You are divine. I love you. You are holy. I love you. You know who you are. I love you. You are worthy to survive and thrive in this world. I love you, and I will say it for 50 seconds if I need to. I love you. 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 Do not leave this space without knowing that you are loved. If you are ever in doubt, call me, email me, text me, because what we will not do in this space is let you go another moment believing anything other than the fact that you are loved deeply just as you are. I love you. I love you. I love you.
Yeah. That's the message. Thank you, Jacaren. That's the message that we must always, as Universalists, as Unitarian Universalists, that's the permanent. All this other stuff is transient. So I look out at the faces I see here, and I say I love you. I've done it a few times in the last 22 years, but it means just as much as the first time I ever said it to you. I look at a camera on a wall, and I know that there's people on the other side of that camera somewhere out in our world, and I love you. And I love what we can be at our best, which is what you just saw. Today, a pivotal day in the history of Unitarian Universalism, I've tried to make the point that some aspects of Unitarian Universalism are transient, ever-changing with the times and with the unique people who generation after generation find in our faith a home, and that there are other aspects of our faith, like love, that are permanent, that stand the test of time, and are passed down from generation to generation. There are parts of our heritage and our distinct UU culture that I hope and trust will never be lost to history. Concepts like the inherent worth and dignity of every human independent web of existence of which we're a part. Concepts like religious freedom. And also then this from Francis David, 16th century Unitarian preacher, advisor to King John Sigismund and author of the world's first and in many ways still only explicit legal declaration of religious tolerance. We need not think alike to love alike. We need not think alike to love alike. May it ever and always be so. Amen. Thank you. For those on Zoom, Louise said she loved me. We've always got to remember the mic. So I've mentioned some of the things that occurred at this altar since it was carved and presented to this congregation in 1881. But I think what has always occurred at this altar is love. One of the ways we express that now in our time is through candles of community. We hold a sacred space for those here in the sanctuary and those on Zoom who are experiencing a joy or a sorrow, to share that with the congregation, and we hold them and what they are holding in love. As I read, well, not read, as I share the first candle here, Bruce will light a candle from our chalice, and there appears to be one candle left, and we light it for those joys or sorrows that remain unexpressed this morning, held in the silent sanctuary of our hearts. Earlier, we sang a hymn from our living tradition that was sung by the very first people to actually be Unitarian Universalists at the joint worship service marking the creation of the UUA. Now, for our final hymn this morning, let's sing another hymn from our UU heritage. You may not think of it that way, but 7 years prior to the merger of the Universalists and the Unitarians, our young people, like they always are, were ahead of the curve and ahead of the adults and led the way for the old fogies when they incorporated an independent nationwide youth group composed of both Unitarian and Universalist young people that they called Liberal Religious Youth, or LRY, or LRY-INC, because it was incorporated. The teenagers of that time, and this was the Eisenhower era, also had a favorite song that they sung, which was informally known as the LRY hymn. I invite you to sing it with me now, thinking of it through that lens, because as Theodore Parker said at the beginning of the sermon he titled The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity, this seems not at all an inappropriate song or sermon to the times in which we live or to the occasion that calls us together. May we take to heart the words of the old LRY hymn, We Would Be One. Please rise in body or spirit. Now, if you would, please read responsively with me the words to our closing reading, An Eternal Verity from Waldemar Argo. I will begin and read the words in regular type on the left side of the slide and ask that you respond with the words printed in bold on the right. An Eternal Verity. Ancient as the home is the temple. Ancient as the workbench is the altar.
Ancient as the sword is the sacrificial fire. Ancient soldier is the priest.
Older than written language is spoken prayer. Older than painting is the thought of a nameless one.
Religion is first and last, the universal language of the human heart.
Differing words describe the outward appearance of things, and diverse symbols represent that which stands beyond and within. Ever the vision leads on, with many gods or with one, with a holy land washed by ocean waters, or a holy land within the heart. Because we are human, we shall ever build our altars. Because each has a holy yearning, we offer everywhere our prayers and anthems.
For an eternal verity abides beneath diversities. We are children of one great love, united in our one eternal family.
And so united, sanctuary, you may join us virtually on Zoom as we extinguish our chalice and share our benediction. May the Spirit of life, that each of us possesses, flow from one to the other. May it stay with us. And bring us peace and harmony. Until we meet again. Amen. What now?